Well, thank you all of you for coming. We're gonna do quite a few sessions today, but first let's do the product address and let's see where RAD Studio is at the moment. We recently launched 11.3, but in this series we're gonna go through all the new features that came with 11 series, Alexandria, and also we'll do a few demos of what's new in RAD Studio. Well, before starting, how many of you are Delphi developers? Okay, so no C++ developers in the room? Okay. And how many of you are on 11 already? Okay, good. Well, before we start, because it's my first time here in Denmark, I want to introduce myself because probably neither of you have heard about me. I'm a pre-sales consultant at Embarcadero. I joined Embarcadero in November, so I'm recently new in the company, but I've been a Delphi developer for the last 15 years. I started with Delphi 7, then I've been through the migrations to Delphi 2010 with the whole Unicode drama, then migrated to Tokyo, Sydney, etc. So even though I'm fairly new in the company, I know the products quite well. I've been working a lot with Firebird, which is pretty similar to Interbase, and I already knew some of the other products of the company. In other things I've been working on, Linux microservices developed with Delphi. This is something that usually people don't take put much attention in, that you can do more than VCL with RAD Studio, and you can actually compile for Linux nowadays, let alone Mac OS, iOS, Android, etc. In the next session about RAD Server, we will talk about microservices a bit because it's such a hot topic. We're not going to go into much detail, but I want to explain the technology just in case you're not very familiar with it, and that you can accomplish those kind of microservices with RAD Studio as well. Also worked developing websites. I've used Laravel, Codenina, which are pretty much PHP frameworks, and on the front end, I've worked quite a lot with Bootstrap and Vue. In case you haven't heard about Vue, it's pretty similar to React, which is the one that everyone is using at the moment. But because I hate the trends, I used Vue instead. And also, big fan of Docker. I don't know if any of you have used Docker? Yeah? Okay. Ish? Okay. It's a very cool technology. It's very cool, and I'm really, now that I joined Embarcadero, I'm really trying to push Docker to offer all our products as images to be used in Docker. We recently launched Interbase for Docker as well, not publicly yet, but it's ready to go. It's been tested at the moment. So yeah, and we also have RAD Server, we have PA Server in case you want to develop microservices for Linux. So we're really trying to push Docker because it's pretty much everywhere nowadays and really coupled with microservices. And I'm trying to learn Kubernetes, but that's a whole different story, quite complicated. And I just have a number of hours a day. Okay, before going into what's new in Alexandria 11, I wanted to talk about Embarcadero, that I don't know if all of you know that now is part of Idera Corporation. It's great that we have all these brands under the same company because we're learning a lot from each other and we're getting a lot of feedback from other divisions of the company. For example, I'm very interested as well in the whole CI/CD for testing and deploying, and we have Travis, we have RunnerX for testing, and Sencha for web development. And recently joined the family Yellowfin, which is a very cool business intelligence application. In case you're interested in BI, which is also quite hot lately, it's pretty much to get data from multiple sources and create very cool web-based reports. So for example, you have multiple databases in your company and you need to merge all that information and show it in a very nice way. It's very, very powerful and uses AI to analyze the data. So it ticks a lot of the trend boxes. And also, as I mentioned, it's very cool because we can speak with any of all these divisions and bring new ideas to Embarcadero, and also the other way around. Actually, for example, Zapater, which is a visual assistant for Visual Studio, is going to be implemented now in version 12 for C++. So all these synergies are very, very, very nice. I think I'm going to skip this one because I'm pretty sure you all know what RAD Studio is. That's pretty much a multi-platform, high-performance IDE to create native applications in modern Object Pascal or C++. What is great about RAD Studio? Well, I'm sure you all know what is great, but yeah, my honest opinion, after working with a lot of different frameworks, I couldn't find any other framework that could be as productive as with RAD Studio. The fact that you can create the UI and also all the logic all within the same framework is just great. The visual designers has been there since the 90s, and luckily we lost those in other frameworks, like Visual Studio, for example, with .NET. They got rid of the whole UI designer. Now you have to use third-party solutions like Adobe XD to create the UI. Then you have to pass that to the front-end dev group. It's a pain. With RAD Studio, you design the UI and it's ready to go. Funny enough, I don't know if you've heard about Flutter, which is a language that Google developed to create multi-platform applications. It's pretty much to create websites and applications for iOS and Android. But now they launched what they called Flutter Flow, which is pretty much this. It's a drag and drop IDE to create the UI. And they're selling it like it's this brand new thing that you don't have to code your UI anymore. And, okay, this has been since the 90s with Delphi. Yeah. So luckily, we're going to see this trend of coming back to, obviously with new features, we need to put new features to make responsiveness a must, so the UI can adapt to different screen sizes and make the most with the real estate we have. But yeah, I truly believe that we're going to come back to designing UIs visually. And this is my favorite one, is backwards compatibility. I don't know any other framework that you can have a very old code, like let's say Delphi 5. And I'm not going to say with very little effort, but you can still reuse that code and compile it in the latest version of RAD Studio. If you want to do the same thing with Java or .NET, good luck trying to migrate the .NET 3.0 to the latest version, because that's definitely not going to work. So that's money after all, and it's your time, and it's very valuable that you can reuse your code and keep it up to date. What is RAD Studio used today? Well, bloody everywhere, pretty much. This is all just a few examples of all the industries that RAD Studio has been used, and it's pretty much everywhere. It's been used since music editors to obviously ERP systems. There is even farms that are using it for milking cows and control how many liters of milk they are milking. And it's quite cool to speak with customers and hear all these places where RAD Studio has been used that you would have never thought about. Okay, enough introduction, and let's get into business. RAD Studio 11.x has been quite a big release with a few hiccups in the updates, because there have been serious changes, mostly with a high DPI migration. Now the whole ID is resolution aware, so you can have a 4K monitor or a 2K monitor, and the IDE will adapt, and it will be crispy and nice. There has been a few issues, mostly if you had two monitors with one for 4K and another one 1080, and you wanted to drag the IDE from one screen to another. But all that has been solved in 11.3 already. We will talk about it later. It's actually, if you have a 4K monitor, it's quite nice to work now with RAD Studio. Let alone also support for high DPI applications compiled by you. So you can use as well this powerful tool and create your VCL applications or FireMonkey applications ready for high DPI monitors. Also, the form designer, when you're designing your UI, now it's style aware. So in case you're using the styles, for example, you want to create a dark mode application, before you had to compile to see how it will look. But now you can see it straight away in the IDE. So you just select the style and RAD Studio will show you how it's going to look. And you can even be very granular and select the styles on a specific components. So you can create very unique applications. And the whole welcome page has been also redesigned from scratch. Now it's all VCL components, the same components that Delphi RAD Studio come with, have been used to create a new welcome page, and it's very customizable. You can create new rows and using widgets and stuff like that. The tabs have been also redesigned. Now we have colored tabs depending on the nature of the tab. They show in different colors, which is quite nice. So, for example, for your source control repository, it goes green. The welcome page is purple. The units are blue. One of my favorite ones is like when you open a unit that is read-only, you see the little lock, which is such a subtle change, but it has drove me mad in the past, has driven me mad in the past, because you try to edit and you don't know what's going on. But now you can see quickly that that unit is read-only, and because it has the little lock. One of my favorite ones in the whole 11 series is the support of Markdown. If you haven't heard about Markdown, it's a language it's not a language as such, a way to create formatted files in a faster way than HTML. This is the standard when you go to GitHub or any repository. Every time you find a readme.md, MD stands for Markdown. But now we support that natively in RAD Studio as well. So you can create your Markdown files and link those to your projects. We'll see a demo in a second. And the cool thing is that it's purely native. We are not using, Internet Explorer anymore. So it's pure VCL implementation. If you still want to use HTML, that's absolutely fine, but now you have Markdown. So in case you're going to share your project with other developers, you can open the Markdown file automatically once the project has been opened. So let's quickly see an example. If I come here, everyone can see this properly. Should I make it bigger? Yeah? Okay. I have somewhere. There you go. So I've opened the project and we're getting this formatted file out of the box. This has been an option since forever with HTML. You could link HTML file to your project, so it will open automatically every time you open the project. That's been done from here, from project page options. So here you could select in the past an HTML file and it opened automatically every time you open the project. But now you can use a Markdown file. How you create a Markdown file? Well, you can create it manually in the File Explorer. You can create the readme.md, or you have here the little shortcut that you can create a new other, and under the other tab, you have Markdown document. So how do we create this Markdown file? So if we come to the code tab, we see, I'm not going to make a markdown tutorial here, but as you can see, it's much, much faster than using HTML, that you need to open and close the tags and probably you forget one. So with Markdown, for example, you just use one hashtag, you type the text, and this is an H1 automatically. If you want bold, you just use asterisks between Markdown, and then this is going to be bold. Underscore for italic. If you want to paste some code, you use these three symbols between the range of your code, and it will be formatted as code. If you want to header 4, you use 4 hashtags. You can also implement images if you want. So as you can see, it's much, much faster than creating an HTML document, and it looks quite nice. So definitely use this instead of HTML. And also, as I said, GitHub, if you're going to share a project on GitHub, this is the de facto standard nowadays.
Thanks.
That's okay. Let's keep going. Okay, Delphi LSP. LSP is a standardized protocol for code completion. So it's pretty much when you type a component or a class dot, and then you get that suggestion of properties and methods that are associated with that component. That's what we call Delphi LSP. This has been redone completely in the last couple of versions. In the last version, it was in beta mode, but in this one has been the full migration. Hence, in 11.0, 1 and 2, there were a few hiccups that it wasn't working as expected. Some big projects, it tend to break. But in 11.3 has been put a lot of effort to fix all this, and now we're getting amazing feedback saying that it's working better than ever. Why the migration to a new auto-completion system? Well, because the old one, it was locked to the main thread, and also locked the IDE. So every time it was calculating what to show, it froze the IDE. This one is much, much modern and is multi-thread, and it can calculate the suggestions in multiple threads at the same time. And it's never on the main one, so it doesn't freeze the IDE, and it's doing a lot of things at the same time. And it much, much stable than previous releases now. So in case you experience any problems with the 11 series, in 11.3, all of them have been tackled, and the Delphi LSP is better than ever. More developer help. The return of XSLT. What is XSLT? It's creating, we will see an example in a second as well, but it's pretty much to create comments on your methods. So when you mouse over that method in another unit or in the same unit, you get a little description, like the comment you've written. So it's built into the little tooltip you get. That was removed in the past, but it's back with extra features. And also, another of my favorite new implementations is see inactive code in the editor. So if you're using compile directives, now you can see if the code is not going to be compiled, then it's grayed out, which is very, very, very helpful if you're in multi-platform development, because sometimes you need to tweak a few things based on the platform. So you know at a glance what is going to be compiled and what is not. So let's quickly see a demo of this. If I come to this unit, this is a dummy example. Okay, so you see here, I have this summary tag, and this is a general description. This uses HTML. So this is a comment, but instead of leaving just as a standard comment, I use the summary tag. So what does this do is when I go down here and I over my method, I'm getting the same comment. So this is very helpful in big developer teams that you want to comment what the method does. Don't get me wrong, I'm more of a fan of creating methods descriptive enough in the name, so don't create very short methods and then create a very big chunk of comment. because then you will have two things to maintain, not only the code, but the comments as well. But this is very, very nice because also you get information about the arguments or parameters that the method receives. In this case, never do as I do, never name n an argument. But as an example, this is very nice. And as I mentioned, you can use it in any method, and it doesn't need to be in the same unit. You can have other units referenced, and you will still get that comment. And the compiler directive, we can see here that we're on Windows 64 at the moment. So we can see that the code that is going to be compiled is this one, because I'm checking if Win32 is defined. As soon as I change to Windows 32, we can see that and it didn't work. Excellent. This is what I call demo effect. Well, I don't know what I did wrong, but it should change and highlight the other one. Let me reopen the project for a second. I don't want to look like a liar. Well, it's completely broken. Excellent. Well, it should have changed to that line. Trust me, it works.
Maybe you have to compile?
Probably. But usually it works out of the box.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for a fact that if I restart Delphi, it should work. Okay, in the meantime, I will show you in a second later. More IDE enhancements. Now the CPU disassembly, it's been formatted with nice colors. It used to be just a blob of text. Now you can see at least some format there, so it's easier to track things down. The getIt component has been split into Delphi and C++ packages, and now you can filter which ones in particular you're looking for in case you're working with both platforms. Also, this one's quite nice. Probably you haven't even noticed because it's that natural that it feels like it has always been there, but now the messages are being colored. It used to be just text, but now you get the warnings in yellow, the hints in blue. When it's success, it goes green. It's a very, very small change, but it looks much, much nicer. And also, finally, the compiler dialog shows the platform and build configuration. So if you're working in a multi-platform development, when you were compiling, you weren't sure in which platform you were. You had to look to the drop-down menu on top. Now it's been shown in the compiling or building dialog. Okay, this has opened again. There you go. So to do a quick example, if I build this, now you can see here that we have the platform that is Windows 64, and we have the build configuration, which is debug. So before you had to be checking here on the right, if you're in debug or release the platform, you have to check it up here. So now it's nice and unified in the compiling dialog. If none of you are C++, let's skip this one then. There was just a minor fix in between 11.1 and 11.2, which we called 11.1.5 to tackle some bug fixes. And along the whole 11 series, we've included a lot of new, we targeted new platforms. We have now Delphi macOS ARM. I don't know if you know that Apple has moved from Intel processors, and now it's all their own silicon. They're called Apple Silicon, of course. And so they're not x86 anymore. Now they are all ARM-based, like your phone or your iPad. And it's actually, this is an M1 processor. So it's one of the new, well, not the new, but a fairly new new ARM processors, and the battery is just crazy. I've never seen anything like this. But obviously that implies that it's a completely new architecture to compile to. So we're not compiling for macOS Intel-based anymore, and we included macOS ARM as a platform supported in FireMonkey. Also, because of this ARM migration, it allowed us to include the iOS simulator as well. So you can compile a FireMonkey application to the iOS simulator that comes with your with macOS if you have installed Xcode. That's very cool because before, if you wanted to compile a FireMonkey application in your phone, you had to pay beforehand the developer fee. So you couldn't test a FireMonkey application on your phone if you don't pay beforehand to Apple. With Android, that's not a problem. You just activate the developer tools, the developer mode, sorry, and then you can compile straight away from RAD Studio to Android. But for iOS wasn't an option. But now we can use the iOS simulator and we can compile from RAD Studio to iOS. We will see these in the third session about mobile development. This is only limited to macOS that uses ARM. So if you have a macOS that uses an Intel processor, it cannot work. Also in 11.2, we included the new API level 32 for Android, and there has been reinforced some security flags. It's quite technical stuff, but in the past, this used to be like warnings letting you know that something was borderline legal, but now there has been reinforced, and if you're using any of these, they will show an error and you will have to refactor your code. As I said, probably you won't even need this, but because of security reasons, they have been moved from warnings to errors. Recent changes in the Delphi language, not much, but we have improved the inline variables. If you're not using those, I really encourage you to use inline variables. They're very nice. You don't have to declare your variables on top of the methods anymore. You can go straight away to wherever you are and create a variable. There's a bit of controversy with this. The people think that it's not very but it's in every single other language. So if you want to attract younger developers, you need to offer this kind of things. Also, sometimes it's nice. Maybe you just need a variable to do some quick calculation, and then you're putting a lot of variables on your method just for something you're going to use in one line. So if you can create it right there, it's even more readable because you see that it's being created right there. So it's good if you find the right balance. So you don't have all your code all over the place, but use it when you can. So there has been a few fixes when it comes to scope and lifetime and all that to make it more, have a fly. That's distracting. So yeah, a few improvements when it comes to inline variables. In the language itself, now we have 1000 separator. This is purely for human readability. So now you can use underscore to split your big numbers so you can read them easily. Obviously, the compiler will remove all these, but you can just use underscore to make a big number more readable. And now you can use binary literals as well, in case you need that. Using this little percentage symbol, you can create a binary literal. Libraries improvement and the runtime libraries. Well, I'm not going to go through every single one, but some improvements with a tzip file and also a few new classes when it comes to URLs and pointer streams. And on the VCL side, we have the new rich edit implementation, which we call rich edit 4.1. And it's because the Win API offers some new features, as you can probably know. Our components link straight away to the Windows API. So the rich edit now has the one offered in Windows 11, I think it was, offers a few extra features. So we implemented those in the rich edit 4.1. Again, many enhancements for scaling and RAD API. And we have this new thing from Microsoft called Win UI, which they say that is maybe the future for UIs. Probably in a couple of years we will never hear about them again. But we created a little demo that you can play around with, where it's a bit bare bones at the moment, but it's good to know that if that's the path that Microsoft is going to take, we're ready to go to use these new APIs that Microsoft is offering. And finally, TH browser and T-Web browser has been migrated to Edge. So we're not using Internet Explorer anymore. But if you use TH browser, it's going to be Edge browser straight away. There's not going to be any link to Internet Explorer. But we understand that there are still some people that use all projects and probably they've been run in all computers and they still need Internet Explorer. So now in the T-Web browser, you have the property to choose if you want to be automatic. So first it will check if it has Edge. So we'll go with Edge, which is Chromium based, is the new Microsoft Internet Explorer. And you can also force if you want it to be using Internet Explorer always. That will bring some problems if you're using Windows 11 because Internet Explorer is not a thing on Windows 11 anymore. But yeah, now you have this flexibility. So depending on your project, you can select which kind of component you want to use. Library improvements in FireMonkey. Well, again, the Chromium Edge implementation on T-Web browser, better high DPI. There is quality and performance improvements in path data. And on the FireDAC side, we support new database versions, like Postgres and Oracle, I think. And the Refine tool, which if you don't know what it is a tool to migrate from DB Express to FireDAC in a fairly fast way. Has been also included to migrate ADO projects. Some RAD server improvements as well, create a new sysadmin endpoints, and the new launch of RAD server Lite, which is a new addition that we launched with Alexandria. If you have used RAD server in the past and you liked it, but you thought it was insanely expensive, then RAD server Lite is going to be for you because it's included with Enterprise and Architect, obviously, for free. You don't have to purchase any licensing, and you can deploy that as much as you want, so that you don't have to pay every time you deploy it to a customer. What are the limitations, you will ask? We will talk about this in more detail in the RAD server session, but if you're not going to have an insane amount of concurrent users, you're going to have like 50, 60 concurrent users, you're going to be more than fine with RAD server Lite because it's monothread and has a few limitations, but for most of scenarios, it's going to be more than enough. And it's very easy to migrate from RAD server Lite in case you need to scale to the paid version. And better HTTP support for MIME types and new SSL certificates, adaptations, etc. And let's talk now about what comes in 11.3. Well, this one has been mainly quality-focused release, so not many new features as such. Has been focused on ironing out bugs and problems that users were having with specific scenarios with high DPI, etc. But still, we're having a few extra features. And one of the main ones is like, ironically, after releasing 11.2, we had new iOS version, new Android version, and new macOS version. I'm talking about a month after the release of 11.2. So we had to really quick implement all these platforms because everyone was saying that also the requirements for stores usually is if you send in a new update or you're uploading a new application, they force you to support the latest version. So you cannot upload a version that is only compatible with the previous version. So we had to push that quite quickly to support iOS 16. The problem was it's only Delphi compatible, not C++ yet. You all should be happy because you're all working with Delphi. It will be fixed for C++, but not yet. And we also added support for Android 13 and macOS Ventura. We also stamped as supported, even though everyone was using it already, Ubuntu 22 and Windows Server 2022. So we're officially supporting those as well. New in FireMonkey, we have a very cool little component, which is biometric authentication in a very Delphi or RAD way. So it's just a component that you drag in your project, and then you have biometric authentication automatically. On iOS, it will be Face ID or Touch ID, and on Android, it will be a fingerprint reader. You have a couple of events to control if the authorization has been okay or not, and then you don't have to worry if you're on one platform or another. Super easy, and if you're developing mobile applications, have a look. I'm actually going to quickly show you how easy it is, and that's the beauty of multi-platform applications. You don't have to be worried about the platform you're working for. So if we come here to biometric authenticator, we just, hello. My computer's doing the weirdest things. Oh, because I'm on Windows 32, sorry. There you go. So it's this component. You can even customize how many attempts you're going to let the user try with the prompt that it will show the user, and also the events I was talking about on authenticate fails and on authenticate succeeds. Dumb proof. You don't. You just code whatever you want to let the user keep going or not. The operating system will do everything for you. Also, an Android new interface to handle phone calls straight away from the application, and some document file provider support. Toolchain improvements, new LLDB, which has been a massive change as well under the hood. LLDB is the debugger that we use for all known Windows applications. It used to be a different debugger for each platform, so you can imagine how much of a nightmare that was to maintain. So there were plenty of bugs and different being reported from the users depending on the platform. So eventually they decided to migrate all the non-Windows debuggers to just LLDB, which is quite a standard in the industry. And that's going to be, well, we'll talk about this in a second in more detail, but it's going to be very good news for the future as well. New notarization process for macOS is an Xcode 14 thing, and also for C++, there has been the $ auto compiler for third-party libraries, but if you're not using C++, that's fine. So what is LLDB? LLDB, as I mentioned, is an internal debugger that RAD Studio uses, and now has been migrated for all the non-Windows platforms, and now we're using exactly the same debugger in all the platforms. That's a big deal for us, because now when a bug is reported, we are going to fix it in all platforms at the same time, and also will help us to introduce new features in a much faster way, because we need to develop them once, and they will be available for all the platforms at the same time. So yeah, that has been, as I mentioned, nothing you can see visually, but we're really paving the road for bringing very cool new features in the future. Still, in this 11.3, some cool features like this one, which has been since forever in a lot of IDEs and frameworks, which is you select one word and then you will see in which many places that word has been written. I think it's going to be easier if I show you an example. Let's come back to the project I had before. So let's say I select my method. I don't know if you can see it, and my screen is slightly darker, but now my method down there has been selected as well. So not selected, but highlighted. So in that way, I can see on my code all the places I'm using what I've selected. So down here as well. Doesn't matter if I selected on top or there or down there. It's been highlighted in the whole code, which is very nice. That this has been in Visual Studio Code and many other IDEs since forever. And now also you can configure it if you want it to be when you select the word or just put in the cursor on it, it will automatically highlight all the words that are being shown in the unit. And also the icons has been migrated to high DPI as well. More smaller changes. I would say one of the biggest ones is like if in case you're using Subversion for source control, we're not shipping the DLLs anymore. So now you have to do as everyone does with Git or Mercurial. You have to use your own DLLs. This is because of security reasons. We don't want to have the responsibility of shipping all DLLs, and we're not doing it with Git or Mercurial either. So now we're not shipping Subversion DLLs with RAD Studio anymore. One that I really like, and it's such a little thing, but I don't know if you've been there, but I've been there a million times. If you're developing a multi-platform application and you want to go to the binary that has been compiled, before you had to right-click here, go to show in Explorer, then it opens the window. You have to go to the platform, get in. If it's debug, if it's released, that was a lot of time wasted there every time you wanted to find the binary. Now, if you come to the build and you say, okay, I want to go to the debug, we have as well as show in Explorer. So it takes you straight away to the binary. And this is such a little new improvement, but it saves you a lot of time. And I really value all these little changes because they add that 1% to your workflow. But if you put all those together, it's going to be quite a boost in your productivity. And also the administrator caption on the IDE. So in case you execute RAD Studio as administrator, you will get here on top a little caption saying that you're running it as administrator. Some third-party components and some hacky things sometimes need to run Delphi as administrator, which we don't really recommend. But you will have a warning up here, and now you can even customize how faded you want the inactive code, because people said that they wanted it to be even more faded with this new tool I was talking about, the compiler directive that shows the code or not. But now you can customize how faded the code is. This is a big one as well, not a direct improvement for you, but it's going to be great in the future, which is we have redone completely how the IDE is being generated, visually speaking. We've called this the Tools API, and what it does, we opened finally all the IDE customization, styles, everything through an official API. Hopefully this will bring a lot of cool libraries from the community, because I don't know if you've used the experts or CMPack. They already offered you stuff like this, like the highlighting feature I just talked about, but they were hacking the IDE to access the visual code. But now we've opened that completely, so users can customize the IDE as much as they want. I'm going to quickly show you demos already coming with RAD Studio, and they're in C users. I hate this trackpad. Users, public documents, Embarcadero, samples. And Object Pascal, we have one that is Tools API. So I'm just going to show you a couple quick examples. For example, Pengata. These are all BPLs. So you can there is plenty of information about this in the doc wiki in case you want to play around with it. But it's pretty much, if I install this, now you can see here on the left, we have colored lines. The odd ones are red and even ones are green. So this is just a quick example of customizing the IDE. If I want to uninstall this, I install it, and off you go. We're back to the standard visual, but I can do much more than that. Oh, don't make me do the whole thing again. Okay. Users, public, documents, Embarcadero. Just want to show a bit of an extreme one. So you can see the possibilities of this. I think this is plain text. So let's open the code. Let's install. There you go. So this is how flexible this is. What we're doing with this one, it's something completely and utterly useless, but it's getting all the reserved words, reverse them, and paint them orange. So this is just an example of that you can do anything you want with the IDE. Very useless unless you're Da Vinci, I guess. But also we're painting this green now because we want it green, because why not? And if we want to uninstall it, same thing, we uninstall it, and off we go. We're back.
It's very nice when you do a code review.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
It works.
So yeah, this is the tools API. Hopefully it will bring very cool stuff. As you can notice, we didn't even have to restart the IDE at all. So it's very, very powerful. Okay. So again, this is not a feature that you're going to have. Well, actually, some of the new features, the highlighting, for example, has been developed already using the new tools API. So this will help us as well to introduce new features for the IDE in a much, much faster way. Well, you can see here, we can even change the background. We've seen the line example, we've seen the backwards one, and we have plenty of examples on GitHub as well. So if you want to scan that QR code, it takes you straight to the Embarcadero repository, and you can download the tools API demos as well. As I mentioned, 11.3 has been mainly focused on quality. Okay. Let's try again. There you go. C++, let's just skip this one, has been a few bug fixes as well. Not much coming to C++ in this version, but it's going to be a big change with version 12. We'll talk about that in a second. That's one of the main reasons why C++ in this release hasn't been cared enough, is because they're doing something big for version 12. The IDE has been also some improvements. As I mentioned, LP-LSP has been really polished in 11.3. Also, again, more improvements with high DPI IDE, in particular with VCL Form Designer. And as I mentioned, if you had multiple monitors with different resolutions, there were a few cases where it didn't work correctly. But still, we have new components. We have this new T-control list, which is a bit niche, but it's a very neat component. It handles millions of rows. In case you need a list that handles millions of rows, this is the one for you, because it uses a virtualized system to show just the items that have been shown, but even though it has millions of rows inside the component, and it handles memory very nicely. So in case you need a massive list, take a look at the new T-control list. Some quality regarding touch keyboards because behind the keys sometimes there were some problems showing the right color. Anti-hotkey, anti-scroll bar works better on high DPI as well. FMX, multiple platform qualities as well. I'm not going to go through all of them either, but pretty much improvements when you're scrolling and how the bitmap has been shown. Also with checkboxes. One that I really like, in case you use X radius and Y radius, when you clip children, and now it respects the rounded edges. If you have any nested components inside, that's very nice. And better tap key cycling across user interface and FireMonkey, which wasn't working in all scenarios. Runtime library and data quality. Again, some new improvements in an updated version of setlib library, better memory allocation, and on the database and FireDAC side, we have PostgreSQL database supported with version 14 and version 15.1. And Oracle better treatment and column names with square brackets, something a bit niche, but there you go. And on Linux, also better support for UTF-8. And we include now Interbase 2020 update 4 already with RAD Studio 11.3. So also that's been applied to IB Lite and IB2Go editions. Web related, when one of the main ones has been automatic token refresh for TOAuth authentication. TOAuth2 is the way you authenticate with third-party providers, like every time you see that button, log in with Google, log in with Facebook, stuff like that on the website, that uses OAuth2. And that gives you a token, and well, there has been some improvements on the components that we offer with RAD Studio to authenticate with those. Better support for nested elements. This is when it comes to the TREST response dataset adapter we'll see in the RAD server version. And also a new version of Apercept AWS SDK, which is the library you can download from Getit to connect to AWS and use some of the, not all of them, but a lot of the services that Amazon offers on the cloud. So if you want to use like an S3 bucket or stuff like that on your applications, you can use that library. So in total, in 11.3 has been nearly 3,000, among the whole 11 series has been nearly 3,000 quality fixes closed in the quality portal. So it's quite a big number. And also after 11.3, we released the patch, 11.3 patch 1, fixing this list of issues that were in some cases quite critical. So in case you didn't download the patch, I encourage you to do so. If you haven't updated to 11.3 yet, obviously when you download 11.3, the patch will be applied by default. And what's coming next? So this is the exciting bit. Even though Idera doesn't let us give an actual roadmap as we used to anymore because of company policies, I have been granted to talk a bit about what's coming to version 12. So the major change is going to be Skia for Delphi. If you don't know Skia, it's a a technology that Google uses for web development. If you have Telegram on your phones, for example, or most of the applications nowadays, all the stickers, the little animations that you see on the stickers and messaging apps, and they're very fluid on your phone and they're very battery smooth, they use Skia. So what we're doing, we're migrating VCL and FireMonkey to use this technology. So it will make it much faster and smoother on mobile and also on Windows. Skia for Delphi is a project that started in Brazil, developed by the team called Hashload. They have plenty of very cool components for Delphi, on GitHub if you want to take a look. So they migrated Skia to be used on Delphi, and eventually the product management team decided to speak with them and implement it natively on Delphi and C++. I'm very excited about that because I've been using FireMonkey and I already had a Skia installed on my as a third-party library, and it's quite cool. Also supports SVG, which is the vector image. Instead of using PNGs or JPEGs or stuff like that, you can use SVJs, which for responsiveness in different resolutions is just a game changer, because if you don't know, SVG is a vector, so you can resize that as much as you want, and it's going to look crispy on every single screen. This is very exciting and very modern, but on the other hand, we have the comeback of MDI. MDI, if you don't know, it's a very old way of developing applications that is forms inside forms. It used to be a thing back in Windows XP, but the problem is that it's not supported by Microsoft anymore, so they deprecated it. They closed all the APIs to access those components, but we have a lot of customers using Delphi that they still have MDI applications. And obviously they want the solutions because they thought that the problem was RAD Studio and the problem was Microsoft. So the team has decided to create from scratch a VCL MDI API to keep using those legacy applications. And that's also coming in version 12, and much more that I'm not allowed to talk about. In case you're interested in seeing all this in more detail, on the C++ side, there's also a lot of big new things coming. We have a blog post here written by David Millington, in case you want to check it out, and here one written by Marco Cantu. These are, I mean, you can find them in our blog on blog.embarcadero.com. And sorry, but no better date release timeline for now, but hopefully soon. So now that we're all caffeinated, let's see what RAD Server is, and I'm going to do a few demos for you and how you can use this in your applications and your current VCL environments as well. So how many of you have heard about RAD Server? Okay, most of you. How many of you are using RAD Server? Yeah.
That's totally different.
Yeah, that's why I asked it twice. Well, I have good news. As I mentioned in the previous presentation, we have a new addition, which is RAD Server Lite, that is much easier to deploy, and it kind of gets cheaper than free. So if you have Enterprise and Architect, try it out. You just need to request a license that you can send an email to support, and then they will give you a license to deploy as much as you want. Okay. The agenda for this presentation is we're going to talk first a bit of history about how system architecture has evolved since the 80s and why it's important, this kind of technology like RAD Server and REST APIs. And after that, I will do a brief introduction to what the REST API is, because I've known previous presentations and I'm talking about RAD Server, and a lot of people don't know what the REST API is, so it makes the whole presentation pointless. So I will do a brief introduction to REST API. If you're familiar with REST APIs, bear with me. It's going to be quick, so you won't get too bored. And then we'll do a RAD Server quick overview, and we will jump straight away and doing some demos on how to accomplish things and integrate those in your current applications. Okay, so system architecture evolution. We had a good 80s where the applications were monolithic, so the whole application was built into the binary, and what we pretty much did, we had the user interface, we had a database, and all the business logic and data access layer, it was in the application itself. So we didn't have any backend at all. All the logic was handled by the application. I know that still a lot of people are following this pattern nowadays, but because of the how technology is evolving, actually in the 90s and the 2000s, we started to see decoupling of the business logic and data access logic to the backend. We have products, they are still valid, like Data Snap that did this. So you moved some of the business logic to a server, and on the website we had PHP and Node and all these backend frameworks that were what we did is decoupling the user interface from the server logic and the database, so the UI didn't have a straight access to the database anymore. But nowadays, we're moving to this crazier ecosystem of multiple services running at the same time, talking between each other. And some of them are in our backend, some others are not even speaking with our backend. So just to put some context to this example, let's say, for example, let's say we have the user interface here, and we're using Google Maps, for example, to show some maps to the user. So this microservice could be Google Maps, and Google Maps doesn't even talk with our backend because we're showing that straight away in the user UI. So we're using Google Maps as a microservice, and then we can have a payment gateway like Stripe or PayPal. Then we need some interaction between the user interface that pays, and then once the payment is validated, it sends a message to our backend. So we also could have here another microservice that could be for login. So it logs everything that the application is doing. So that being saved in a different database. So we can see that this gets a bit more complicated to develop, but on the other hand, the major benefit of microservices is that if one fails, the rest keep working. In this previous environment, or this one, if one of the sides fail, the whole application stops working. With microservices, we split our application in multiple small applications, and as I mentioned, if one fails, at least the rest keep working, which is one of the main benefits of microservices. I'm not gonna lie, this adds an extra layer of complexity to development because now you're gonna have multiple projects going on at the same time. But it's very good in case you're working in different projects because you can reuse these microservices because they are very decoupled and abstracted from the application. You can reuse them for other projects. So if you create your own, let's say, invoicing system, if you abstract that enough, you can reuse that invoicing system for other project that is not the same as the one you created initially for. This is not possible with all monolithic applications where all the logic is inside the same application. It's true that you can reuse a unit for another project and stuff like that, but here we're talking about a fully independent application that communicates through language that usually is REST API. So these microservices communicate between each other. There are more advanced communication languages like MQQ, but we're not going to complicate it today. The main standard is REST API. So that's how they communicate between each other, and that's why we need to understand what REST API is and how we can implement that. So what is REST API architecture? Well, we have to give some shape to this. We have a standard server that has some web services running, authentication, static files, and it connects to a database. The database could be in the same server or it could be in a different server. And then we can use third-party services from within the server itself. Let's say, for example, a phone validator external service that we send a phone number and it tells us if it's a valid number or not, for example. That the UI would never know that we're calling a third-party service from the back end. But this is another microservice that we build into the service, into the server, sorry. So yeah, we have the customer clients here, and we use HTTP requests to get the information. HTTP requests are exactly the same ones as you do when you access a website. So you send an HTTP request, and then you get a response from the server. But usually when you access a website, that response is in the shape of an HTML file. So then your browser adapts that HTML to show you what's in it. For REST APIs, we use exactly the same technology, HTTP requests and responses, but the information we send and we receive is in JSON format or XML. I have to say it's quite rare nowadays to find an API that still uses XML, but so JSON is the factor standard. But maybe if you work with an old API, they still work with HTML. So it's the same concept as HTTP requests for HTML, but we send different type of content. And we have these four verbs that we use to say what we're going to do with that request. Because obviously, if we want to tell the server, you need to update this, or create this record, or delete this record, we need to say in some way to the server what it needs to do with the information we're sending or requesting. So we have these four verbs. We have get, post, put, and delete. Maybe in some APIs you will find patch instead of put, but it's very subtle differences. So let's just stick with just put. So here we have an example of what is called a URI. On the left, you will have an IPE or a domain. So let's say mydomain.com/users. We would send a get request, and then we will get a JSON file with a list of all the users. If we send a post request with a user in the body in a JSON format, we're telling the server, hey, I want to create a user. Same, if I want to get one specific user, I send a request saying /users/ and the user ID. Could be 1,000, whatever the ID is. So we're getting that specific user. If we want to modify that user, we send exactly the same request, but we send a put request. And that way, we send the modifications we want to do to this to that user, and the server will handle it for us. And same thing, if we want to delete the user, we send my domain or my IP/users and the ID, and we will delete the user. So this is fundamentally how a REST API works. It's a fully decoupled connection to a database. So we're not connecting to a database anymore. We're sending requests, and the server will do the rest for us. Obviously, each of these will be a method that we can verify a lot of things before accepting that request. For example, if someone is requesting to create a user and is not sending me all the required fields, we can respond with an error saying, hey, you need to provide a last name, for example, or this telephone is not valid. But this is the fundamentals that we're going to be using during this presentation. And in case you've never seen it, which I doubt, this is an example of how a JSON file looks like. This is nearly JavaScript. This is where JSON was created from. We have this object that opens with curly braces, and then we have the properties here on the left, and then we have the values on the right. So this would be the database fields, let's say. And here on the right, we can have some primitives like integers, strings, booleans. But the good thing of JSON is that you can make more complex objects that just you would do with a database. For example, you can return arrays. So we have hobbies, and we have an array of 3 values here. And you can even create arrays of objects. You have addresses, and we open an array with brackets, and then we have 2 objects inside addresses. So this would be kind of a master detail scenario. Why we're doing this complex and not send 2 requests, one for the user and one for the addresses? Because requests are expensive. It takes milliseconds, a few milliseconds to send a request. That's the bit that takes the most. So when you're using REST API, what we want to get is as much information as possible with just one request. Because creating this in the backend is going to take nearly nothing, but it will take 50, 60, 70 milliseconds to process that request from the internet to the server. So that's why we're trying to send as much information as possible in just one request. Not mandatory. You can still use as many requests as you want. This is just good practice. Okay, enough theory about REST API. What is RAD server? Well, it's what we call a fully powered MIP, which is mobile enterprise application platform. And what it pretty much does is using the RAD philosophy, create a very quickly a REST API. So you can use the components you know already. You can use FireDAC, connecting to your database, and then convert all those data sets or queries to JSON responses using components that are coming with Delphi already. And once you have a REST API created with RAD server, the world is your oyster, because you can connect that to a VCL application or to a FireMonkey application, or you can even create a website, or you can even open that API to one of your customers and they can integrate that in their workflow. So every time an order has been created, we send a request to an endpoint they're asking us to. So it gives a lot of flexibility once you have that published. And good news, it works with Windows, Linux, and Docker as well. So if in Linux, you will need Apache, and on Windows, you will need IIS, which is the web server that's coming from Microsoft. Because it's important to understand that RAD server is stateless. So it's not an application that has been run constantly in the background. So every request has been handled, and once the request is closed, all the memory has been unallocated. So you cannot have, let's say, a mem table where you keep information, and then when you have another request, you check what is in the mem table. No. REST APIs are completely RESTful, and you open a request, you close a request, off you go. So what includes RAD server? Well, includes quite a lot of things out of the box. You have all the alternatives out there, but the good thing about RAD server is all the functionality that offers you out of the box. I want to emphasize that you don't need to use all of them. You can start very small, creating just a tiny API. But then in the future, if you want to scale, you know that you have all these extra features that you can implement in your application. So for example, we're offering access control out of the box to create users and groups. So you can create different roles, and you can define these users can access these endpoints. These other users can access these other endpoints. We will see a few examples about this later. We offer as well API analytics to know how many people are accessing our API and which time of the day, to which endpoints, which is great to plan updating schedules. So you want to update your application, you can have specific times of the day where the API is not being used that much. We also offer in Swagger Open API documentation, which is the standard to document APIs. You can use attributes. We'll see an example as well on RAD server to document your endpoints. So you can share that with the rest of the team or even with third-party developers. So they will see all your endpoints and how they can access them. We integrate as well push notifications for iOS and Android, all that included with RAD server. Obviously, you will need to configure your own certificates. In case you have a vast list of users and you don't want to create them manually, you can link RAD server with an Active Directory or Open LDAP if you want. So all the users will be included automatically. We have a more niche solution for user location proximity. We use beacons, for example, for a warehouse. If you want to track where, let's say, a trolley is and stuff like that, you can link all that automatically. We also have components to create applications that use those beacons. As I mentioned, Docker support, Windows and Linux, multi-tenancy support, not very useful in the light version, but if you want to have just one single version of RAD server and you want to have multiple customers using the same instance, you can use multi-tenancy as well. And as I mentioned, we provide a bunch of different components that make the development with RAD server very rad. So you have your final product very, very quickly. And as I said earlier, you don't need to learn or use all these features to start using RAD server, because they are not the only one. We have plenty of other features that come as well with RAD server. And I literally don't have time to talk about all of them. But as I said, just start small, and you know that you can make it way more complex as soon as you start needing more complexity in your application. Okay, enough theory. Let's try out some code. Okay, to create a RAD server application, you just need to come here to New, and if you come to Other, you will see the RAD server tab here. This is available for all the Enterprise and Architect editions. So if you have that license, this tab will be there for you. So let's click OK. And we are going to see a little wizard that will ask us a few things. We can create a full empty project, or we can create a package with some resources. We're going to start very small, and then we will make a more complex project later. Let's put a name to the resource. Let's call it test, and we can select if it's a data module or a unit. Let's go with a data module so we can see the components we're using. And now we can start seeing this theory I was talking about. We're starting to see these terms like get, post, put, delete, all that. And we can link as well to database endpoints. We'll see an example later. And we have this API documentation. This is the Swagger Open API I was talking about that is going to be created for us automatically. To create something very simple, let's just start with a get and get item. So let's press finish. And then the project is created automatically for us. We can see that here on the platforms is compatible with Linux 64 as well. And if we come to the code, we have something. I'm going to make the font slightly smaller, if I can. It's not working. Great. Okay, never mind. So we have here the resource name I just created, which is test. And this is pretty much just two methods, one get and one get item. We can see that we're using a lot of attributes. I don't know if you're familiar with attributes in Delphi. They're a very cool way, fairly modern, to add extra functionality to methods. So in this case, all this big chunk of here is to create the documentation for Swagger UI. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. It's just a way to document your REST API, and then you can create a YAML file that will have all this text and all these examples. So you can use that to create documentation automatically for you. So you don't need to create that in a different file. It will be created for you automatically. And we have here, this is the important one, the resource suffix, which we're saying between curly braces items. So what we're saying here is that to this method, we're expecting one value there. Do you remember the example we did with users? We could get the list of all the users, or we could get one user in particular. So in this one, we're saying, hey, you need to pass something here. So what is going to respond this API? We have the get method and we have the get item. So the get method just going to respond text that says test. And the get item, what we're doing, we're getting from the params that we're expecting, we're extracting the item, and we're concatenating it here. So whatever I pass on the URL, we're going to get test plus that text I've written. So this is all the code we need. Obviously, this is a fairly useless API just for demo purposes. We're going to make it more complex in a second. Okay, I compiled this, and this is the RAD development server that we provide. So you don't need to install Apache or IIS or anything. This runs a web server for you automatically. And we can see here that it's running in port 8080. In case you are using that port in your computer, you can stop it, change the port for one that you are not being used, and click start again. And here we can see a bunch of things that the log is showing to us. We can see our two endpoints. We can see the test/item here, and we can see the test as well. But also we can see a bunch of other endpoints that RAD server is creating for us automatically. This is what I was talking about earlier. It comes with a lot of things that you can use as well, like the users. We have the sysadmin I was talking about during the previous presentation, is for accessing the login remotely. And we also have all the users and groups that we have here to create users, etc. You don't need to use those if you don't want to, or you don't need to, but they're already ready to go for you there. So how do we access this little REST API we created? Well, we open the browser. It tells us, okay, we're running, if you can see, we're accessing localhost port 8080, which is the port I defined. And it accesses straight away to /version. So we can see that we're running RAD server version 4.5. But if I access now to test, it returns test, which is what is in the method. And if I access to test hi Denmark, then it returns test hi Denmark, because it's what I coded that I want to be returned. But then you can say, hey, Antonio, you've been talking about JSON files and all that, and this is just plain text, because it's a very basic example. So now let's make it juicier and link this to a database. So let's close this tiny project, and let's use the assistant again. And now what we're going to do is call the same thing, test. And now we're going to say, I don't need this sample endpoints. I want database endpoints. And now the wizard is different. Now I can see here all the databases I have connected to my Delphi IDE. I'm going to select the employee database. And we can see all the tables that I have in this database. I'm going to select customers and sales. And now we can see more things here. We can see an FireDAC connection that is connecting to that database. Obviously, I connected to one that I have configured in my Delphi IDE, but if you want to move this to production, you have to change to the production database. Now this we're developing is connecting to a local database I have on my computer. And the queries I have here, they're very simple. If you access the content, we can see that it's pretty much just a basic SQL. We'll talk about this macro later in a second. It's necessary to use some of the magic that uses the components behind the scenes. But same thing with sales, just a standard SQL to get all the records. But we can see here we have two other components. These two components, they're called TMS dataset resource. And what they do, they're going to create all our endpoints for us automatically to get the list of the all the records linked to a data set. We can also get one in particular. We can create new ones. We can modify and we can delete. All that automatically done for us. And we can use as well pagination. We'll speak about this in a second. And sorting, hence that macro we saw earlier. But what is in the code? Okay, if we come to the code, we can see that we have no code. So all the magic has been done by just this component, dataset resource. We have the resource suffix, which is the name we're going to have in our IPE. If you want to be follow the standards, usually they should be in plural, so customers. and sales. And let's run this and see what happens. I'm going to close my previous RAD server and let's compile this one. Okay. If we analyze now the log, we can see that we have test customers /ID with put, post, delete. So all this has been created for us automatically. If we open now the URL and say test customers, we have already all the rows or records from the data set formatted for me with even detecting the type of the field. So if it's number, it's been shown as a number. And we have all the records here in JSON format. And I didn't need to code one line of one single line. And also we can access one customer in particular. Let's say I want to access the customer 1004. I just type 1004 and I get that specific customer. Same thing with sales. If I access sales, I have all the sales. And the ID even works if it has letters in it. So we get an order in particular. Okay, this is good. This is getting shape now. Let's see, because probably, as you can imagine, we don't want to, if we have a table with, let's say, 1 million rows, we don't want to return a list of customers in just one request, because there's going to be like some megabytes response. So we need to keep it as small as possible. That's why pagination comes in place. So we need to define how many rows we want to return on each request. So here we can define the size of the page, and because it's a very tiny table, let's say 3. Let's restart this. And now if I say customers, I want page 1. If you don't know how URL parameters work, you need to add the question mark and then you pass the parameters. In this case, I want page 1. And then it returns just 3 values, which is the 3 I wanted. I specified that I wanted just 3 values. But if I go to page 2, then I get the next 3 and so on. But you can say, hey, I also want this ordered by one field in particular. So I just need to add an extra parameter and say SF with this sorting field. And I'm going to say contact last equals A, which is ascendant. So now I'm on page 1, ordered by contact last by, we start with B, we keep going with B. But if I go to page 2, it's still going to be ordered, but getting just the 3 next rows. So if you haven't coded REST APIs in the past, I just want to tell you that this is a pain to do. And this is all done automatically for you with this component. So still, this is a cool example, but you can say, hey, Antonio, you showed us a more complex JSON file that it has nested objects as well. How do we do master detail? How would you return, for example, the sales of a customer in particular within the customer information? Okay, let's make it more complex. I'm going to close this project. And I'm going to open one that I have here somewhere. Let's have a master detail. Okay, we're following exactly the same example where we left it. The thing is I have to code a few lines now, so I didn't want to bore you coding. What we've done pretty much is add in some extra suffix to the list. So now, for example, we're going to have the possibility of getting customers / the customer number and then slash sales, and we will get the sales of that customer in particular. But also I created another customer details that pass in the customer number. We're going to get this master detail we were talking about. So first, let's see where we're getting with this endpoint, and then we will see how it has been coded. I'm going to close my previous RAD server. Okay. So the functionality we had before, which is still valid, still working. But now what we're going to do, we access the customer 1004, for example. But now I can say, hey, I want the sales of this customer. And it's a missing slash at the end. There you go. So these are the sales of the customer 1004. So this is also quite standard when it comes to REST APIs, having this nested requests. But also it's very standard to have the master detail responses. So if I get the customer details endpoint and I say, okay, I want the 1004, now we're starting to get a more complex response. We have the customer details here, but now we have another one that says sales. So in one request, we're getting all this information that then we can convert in the UI to a master detail relationship. So how has this been done? Okay, obviously this implies some text, but still we are in the 100 something lines of code, which is quite low code. So we have the first one, which is the customers / customer number / sales. This requires no code whatsoever because the component TMS dataset resource is clever enough that detects that this is a parameter I have in the query. So if I open the query, I have here customer number equals 2 dots customer number. So it detects that the query has a parameter and injects that value straight away for me. So I don't need to code anything at all. And because it's going from sales, it's going to filter the customers, the sales of the customer we're passing in the endpoint. For the other one, that we have the master detail, it implies some other code, but most of the code, it would be reusable in other methods. So the code, it's this. So what we're doing pretty much is I'm getting the customer number, I'm getting from the URL, and then I'm filtering through a macro the customer number, so to get the customer details. And then I pass that customer number to reusing that parameter I had in the query sales to get the sales of that customer in particular. And then we have plenty of methods that we can use in RAD server, say using the JSON writer object. We can write start an object. We remember that in a JSON file, we open an object with the curly braces, and we open an array with brackets. So we can use that straight away saying, hey, I want to open an object, and then I'm going to convert a record to a JSON object. This is a method I coded myself, and I'm reusing it in a lot of projects. So in this case, it's inside this method itself, because I'm not using it anywhere, but you can abstract this to a util unit or something like that and reuse it as much as you want. So you can reuse it for a lot of endpoints. Because what it does pretty much, it gets a data set and converts all the fields to an object in JSON format. That's it. And then I have another method that what it does, it creates children to JSON array. So what it does is creating all the sales to an array of objects. Again, this method, you can reuse it in a lot of other projects, or in the same project in a bunch of different methods. So the code, what it does is pretty much that. It opens an object, converts the customer to an object, and then converts the sales to a JSON array. And then we close the object, we close the queries, and off you go. So this few lines, it creates this. Obviously, you need to customize it depending on your needs, but once you have this boilerplate created, you can create your APIs very, very fast. In this case, we have no security at all. This is an open API. We would need to implement some security rules to authenticate that with user password and all that. We're not going to go through in an hour about this whole thing, but you have the functionality out of the box. Let's make another quick example that maybe resonates a bit more. We have tasks. This is an example you can download from GitHub, by the way. You have the QR code there. I can share with you. I can send Fleming my slides in case you want to access all these QR codes in the next days. Okay. So this demo, what we're going to do, we have a RAD server instance that has tasks. And then what we will do is to connect the VCL application to those endpoints and convert those to a mem table. Everything, again, reusing components that come with Delphi. We have the RAD server. Let's execute this. And it crashes, of course. Oh, I'm missing a Y there. Okay. Now let's come to the VCL application, which is a very simple application. And if we keep the RAD server there, so we can see that it's getting requests in the background. Let's click fetch. So we've converted this list of tasks to a mem table and show them in a grid. We're going to see in a second how we do that. This is from yesterday's demo. I typed foo. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to delete bar as well. And in this case, we're using a custom component that what it does, it caches all the modifications. So we're not sending every modification straight away to the server. So now I can come here and say change count, and it tells me you've modified 2 things, and we haven't sent them to the server yet. So if you notice, we're not seeing anything here in the backend been sent yet. But now, if I click save, all the modifications have been sent through put requests, because they are modifications. Same thing if I create a new one. If I create a new record, so the ID is going to be 4 test F. We have 1 modification, and if I save, we've sent a post request because we're creating a new record. So how has this been done? Okay. First, we're going to see in a second what all these components are. These come with Delphi built in, and you can use this not only to access RAD server, but any API. So this is a REST client. We send a request, then we get a response. And then we have the magic component, which is response dataset adapter. That what it does is pretty much what it says. It converts the JSON response to a mem table. We have this mem table right here that has no fields at all, so it's empty. But the response dataset adapter that is linked to that mem table right here, it will create the fields for us and populate the table with the JSON values. So the rest, I'm going to quickly show you, because this is a very good example that you can download from GitHub, because it has this cool REST data updater. I cannot go through the whole thing. It's way simpler than it looks, but it's pretty much to use this cool feature of catching modifications and send them in batch to the server, which in some scenarios could be very interesting. As I said, I'm not going to go through the whole code now, but it's a very cool example to analyze how this whole REST API world works. Tool I really want to show you, in case you've never heard about it or used it, is the REST debugger that you can find under Tools. The REST debugger, what it lets us do is obviously debug REST APIs, and it could be used for debugging your RAD server applications, or in case you're using it to access third-party applications, you can use it as well. So in this case, let's access a local host 8080, and I think the resource is called data tasks. Yes. So if I send a request, we're getting a 200, which is an OK. If there was a problem, it will be a 400 something. Probably you've seen the 404 error everywhere on the web. That means that it's an error. It's something not found. That's a code used as well when you're developing a REST API. If you request an ID, for example, a user ID that doesn't exist, you need to return a 404 because the record hasn't been found. There is a whole list of errors that you need to know. For example, when a 200 is being used for a request that has been processed correctly, 201 is being used for a record has been created. 500 is when the server crashes. So there's a whole, this is not RAD server related. This is how REST API works. And there's a whole list of errors that codes that you need to know, and we're actually given a lot of constants, so you don't need to remember them. There's a class that you can access all those codes from a unit in Delphi. So yeah, I send the request, and we're getting a 200. And if I come here to body, we can see the response we're getting, which are purely the tasks. And if I come here to tabular data, it converts automatically for us the response to kind of a grid, which is quite cool. And I can use this, as I said, not just for RAD server, but for any other API. But also, in case you want to test to create records and stuff like that, you can select here the method you want to send. If you want to modify something or create something, you can select the method you're using on your request. But the cool bit about the REST debugger is this button right here, which is copy components. So we press copy components, and it says, okay, I need to be here in tabular data. Copy components. Okay, so now I copy to the clipboard a T-REST client, T-REST request, T-REST response, T-REST response dataset adapter, and TFD mem table. So I just need to come to a brand new project, or if you have your own project opened, and you can drop all these in a new data module. Let's create a new one. And I paste. And we get this bunch of components here that I'm going to spread out so we can all analyze them in more detail. But probably they're starting to look familiar because we've just seen them in the previous example. So what this is doing, we're getting the REST client, which is pointing to the local host 8080, which is the host I specify in the request. We're sending a request to the endpoint I specify, which is data tasks. And the response is linked to the request. And also the response dataset adapter is linked to the mem table and to the response. So we have all that functionality already configured here. The only thing I need to do, I can execute the request from here. Okay, we're getting the 200, and I can access the mem table now. And the data has been populated on the mem table automatically. Okay, obviously, this is a basic example. You can tweak these endpoints and code depending on what you want to retrieve and all that. But having this functionality, because at the moment, the only thing I need to do is to drop a grid and a data source. We link the data source to the mem table and the grid. Oh, because it's a VCL, SFI monkey, I need to use live bindings. Let me quickly do it. Oh God, can I see a thing? Anyway, I cannot see a thing because of the resolution, because of the projector is very, very tiny. Anyway. Oh, that will be better, yeah. I'm gonna need anyway a dataset adapter. Okay, let's quickly do it with an all VCL version. We're gonna finish faster. I still have the components there. Grid, data source. Okay, have the mem table, data set, the request, and if we execute the request, there you go. The grid is populated automatically with the information pulled from a JSON response. So these are very, very cool components that they're going to make your life much, much easier dealing with JSON responses. And as I said, this is an example based on RAD server, but you can use this for any third-party APIs as well and implement this functionality using, I don't know, a weather API if you want to show the weather in your application, for example. Okay, we still have a few minutes.
We still have half an hour.
Half an hour?
That's 30 minutes.
Okay, let's talk about the console, the analytics I was talking about. I press the open console here, and we can access with a console. This is a default user and password I have configured here. Obviously, you can configure it the way you want. I think it was console pass. Yeah. Okay. All this comes already with RAD server automatically. These are the statistics I was talking about. You can see, for example, here all the users that you have created. I have just have obviously my user and a few extra examples. You have the groups as well that you have created. You can create users even programmatically if you want from your application. So in case you need to create a user from a VCL application, you can connect to a data server, RAD server, sorry, and create users and groups manually. But the bit I really want to show you is the analytics here. We have the total clients, which is all the clients that have been accessing the RAD server. In this case, obviously, it's just me. And the cool ones are the API calls. We have here daily analytics. We've had today 25 calls, which has been during this demo. And if we come to monthly, we can see also API access we've had during the whole month. And the cool one is here, API call endpoints. Now we can select, no, sorry, user. Now it's the endpoints, yeah, it's the endpoints. We can see specific endpoints, which time of the day we're getting access to. So we have the tasks, we have the customers, we have, if they're put, they're get, etc. Obviously, this is a very basic example because it's just me. If you have this in production, you will have thousands of requests. So if you access and now monthly, I'm not going to have probably anything, but if you access this in a monthly basis, you can see which days you're having more traffic, which days you're having less traffic, so you can plan your updates, so you affect your customers much less. And as I said, this is there. You can use it or not. It's up to you, but it's already pre-configured for you. And with the sysadmin new endpoints, you can access all this information as well through an API in case you want to integrate it in your own PC and in your own application. You don't want to give access users to this console. You can still access all this data through the API itself from all the endpoints that RAD server creates automatically for you. So all these sysadmin endpoints is a way to access all this data as well. Actually, this application, this web application, is accessing those endpoints. Okay. So we've talked about the REST debugger, very neat application that comes with RAD Studio. Probably if you've been working with REST API development, you've used Postman or something like that in the past. This is pretty much the same thing, but more focused on RAD Studio development, because you have that very cool copy components magical button. The analytics we just saw, great. You don't have to do anything. The only bit that you need to know is that RAD server needs an interbase service running, because all this data is being stored in an interbase database. So if you want to deploy this in production, you will need an interbase instance running. You don't need to buy a license or anything. It comes with a license itself. And now we're going to see the differences between each edition of RAD server. We have the multi-site, the single site, and the new light edition. The features included on each edition, well, they are the same features. Every edition has exactly the same features. Even the light one has all these features we're seeing. But obviously, there are some differences between them. The single edition, sorry, the light edition comes with Enterprise and Architect. The single site, it comes with Enterprise. So you have one license of single site included with Enterprise. And the multi-site, it comes with Architect, or if you want to buy extra licenses, you can also speak with sales, and I'm sure you will find an agreement with them. The major difference between the single site and multi-site compared with light is the scalability, because the light is a single node, so you cannot scale it. It's focused on small deployments like 50, 60, 70 concurrent users, which is already quite decent for most scenarios. But if you're going to have, let's say, 10,000 concurrent users, you need to go to the single site or multi-site. The light cannot be deployed in Docker, and it uses an executable that creates that web server for you, so it doesn't run. Some people actually prefer it, so they don't need to deploy their own Apache or IIS. So we provide around, it's pretty much like we've seen that little web server that creates the developer for us. So the limitation of the light is you cannot use it deployed on Docker. But the good thing is you can deploy it as much as you want, even although the single site, you can deploy it just in one server. And if you need multi-site with the whole functionality, you need Architect. The security, so when it comes to HTTPS support, the multi-site and single site, that's already built in with Apache or IIS. So the HTTPS certificate is going to be built into IIS or Apache. With Light, we don't offer HTTPS support, but you can easily implement that with a reverse proxy like nginx and using Let's Encrypt or something like that. If you need more information about that, I can send you an email with more detail. But if you're speaking with someone that has some knowledge about web development, it's so easy to create a reverse proxy and encrypt your data from Light. And as I mentioned as well a few minutes ago, we have the interbase that is needed for multi-site and single site. You need an interbase server instance running. It doesn't imply that your data needs to be an interbase as well. You can connect to any database with FireDAG, so you can have your data in Oracle or PostgreSQL or MySQL. But RAD server to run needs an interface database to store the analytics, to store the endpoints, to store the users. So, but as I said, that instance is exclusive for RAD server, and your data could be in any other database. If it's an interface, much better, of course, but if it's not a big deal. For Lite, we don't use an interface server instance. We use interface to go instead, which is the embedded version of interface. So you don't need to install it as such. You just need to copy the DLLs, and because it's mono-thread, so we don't need multiple concurrency access. We can use IB2Go, and it's just a DLL that you copy and paste, and you copy the interface database, and off you go. And the license management, as I mentioned, a license for each deployment on single site and multi-site, but the Lite is free to deploy once you have the license. Here you have a few links with more information. There's plenty of videos on YouTube about RAD server. The doc wiki is full as well of information. We have a white paper created by David I. It is slightly dated. I'm in charge of rewriting that. I'm working on it. It's going to take a few months still because it's a 200 pages document. I want to redo quite a lot of things. I'm going to try a new approach. Instead of having a massive PDF, I'm going to split it in different chapters and with videos linked with examples on GitHub for each chapter to make it more digestible than not just 200 pages PDF. But as you can imagine, record the videos and do the whole thing. It's going to take a while. But still, it's a fairly valid white paper that you can download for free. And stay tuned for our blog, because as soon as I can, I will deliver at least 6-7 chapters of the new format I'm working on. And that's pretty much it. I don't know if you have any questions. I couldn't stretch this anymore. So, last session, but we kept the best thing for the last. So we're going to see how you can add mobile support to your existing RAD Studio applications, because a lot of people tend to think that when they have to move to FireMonkey, they have to throw away the previous VCL applications and start from scratch, and that's not the right approach at all. What we're suggesting is that you can create mobile applications or migrate some of your features to FireMonkey and even reuse some of your code in this new project, and also providing new features through mobile that you cannot offer through VCL. So you can keep your VCL applications. That's a lot of years of work, but we can create and offer new features to your customer base. And we're going to see in this presentation how you can accomplish that. So the agenda is going to be why adding mobile, a few reasons about why you should and you must, things you need to think about before getting ready for mobile, how to choose the right tooling. We will also talk about mobile and data storage, because it's quite important how you can store the data and cache it in in a mobile application and store it securely. We'll do a few demos, and then at the end, we'll do a quick Q&A. Okay, big question, why add mobile? Well, the answer is right there. You can see that everyone is holding one of those. So this is a critical mass of bring your own device. Everyone has one of these little things in their pockets. And if you're not taking advantage of that, then you should think about it. There is this famous case study in a company that they had these cards for doing the check-in, check-out. So when you get in the office, you check in, and when you get out, you check out. And they were using cards, so it was fairly easy, but a lot of people tend to forget those cards at home, and then they have to go to a computer and do it manually, and that's, after all, a lot of time the workers are spending. So the IT department decided to migrate the system to a mobile check-in, check-out card. And you can guess the percentage of people that forgot their cards from that moment, which dropped to 0%. Because if you leave home and you forget your check-in, check-out card, then you will think, I will sort it out in the office. But if after leaving home you realize that you forgot your phone, you're coming back home to pick it up. So you can imagine how powerful that is, and if you're not taking advantage from that, then you should think about it. And also, it's a great way to give your customers a more holistic solution. What does this mean? It's just you're going to give them a rounder solution to your customers, so they will be also more tight with your product. Will lead to customer stickiness. The more products and the more services they use, the more difficult it will be for them to move to a competitor or to migrate to a different solution. And it has very, very lower risk and costs because you have the tools already. You don't need to learn a new language. You don't need to purchase new licenses. You don't need new computers to use this technology. FireMonkey is already in every single RAD Studio edition, even Professional, Enterprise, and obviously Architect. Even the Community Edition, you can play around with FireMonkey. There are some limitations when it comes to Professional and Enterprise, but it's not related with FireMonkey, but more to data connection. But we will talk about that later if you want in the Q&A. But yeah. If you have already Delphi, give it a shot because it's not going to cost you absolutely anything. And usability is very important because sometimes mobile can be better, even though people tend to think that they prefer for work having a computer with a keyboard, with a mouse, with a screen. But mobiles can do a lot of things that computers can't. For example, using the camera. Using the GPS location. Those are all features that you can implement in your software that you cannot provide through a VCL application on a computer. So definitely think about giving extra functionality to your applications through mobile. And if you don't, your competitors will. So that's something also to keep in mind, that the market and the trend is going to mobile, going to the web. And if you don't, and at the moment you're only providing applications through desktop, your competitors will be doing it. Okay, what do you think before you start getting ready for mobile? Well, the first thing that changes quite a bit is the infrastructure difference. We're talking now between local versus remote. We've seen in the previous presentation RAD server that opens that remote accessibility to your application and to your data. So that's something to keep in mind, that if you want to go mobile, you will need to offer your data in a different way. It's true that you could work with a VPN, for example, and connect to your database remotely from a phone using a VPN, but that could work in a more enterprise environment. But if you're aiming for a bigger audience, you need to offer remote accessibility through an API, a REST API, because you cannot tell someone that downloads the application from the Apple Store or the Play Store saying, hey, you also need to set up a VPN to connect to the backend. That's not a thing. So that's something you need to think about. There's also a slightly niche solution to use mobile as well, which is app tethering. What does it mean? You have your phone and you connect it through Bluetooth to your computer. That could be a laptop, and then you can use the features from a phone and sync all that information through Bluetooth to a desktop application. I've seen that being used, for example, in the health industry, where a doctor is carrying a laptop and then uses the phone to take pictures of wounds or conditions, and that information has been synced to the laptop, which is also another approach that maybe could suit your needs. And you also have the cloud. You have Azure and AWS or Google Cloud. You can connect to those services and avoid the whole remote accessibility altogether and connect to the cloud. Personally, I do like the cloud, but I believe more in a hybrid solution. So putting all your eggs in the same basket. I'm not a fan, but it's great to use, for example, S3 buckets to store pictures, and so you don't need a bunch of storage in your infrastructure. So you could have a hybrid solution using part of the cloud services and RAD server or any other solution for a backend. There's some data security and risk mitigations that is important to take into consideration as well. Want to remember that all the FireMonkey applications are natively compiled, so we have binary that we're deploying to our customer base. If you create a website or you use other solutions that they create like a built-in web inside the application, like Cordova or Zapater, if you used it in the past, you're providing the code with your application. Even on a website, the users downloading a lot of the code through HTML and JavaScript. It's true that nowadays it's not compiled as such, it's more like obfuscated, so it's more difficult to analyze that code, but still, you're providing some of that logic to the customer and they could analyze that information. Through a compiled application is more complicated to access that kind of data. Time to market, it's also how long it will take you to be in the market. If you're using FireMonkey, it's going to be way faster because you know the technology already, you know how to code in Pascal, you don't need to learn any language. And if you want to develop native applications for iOS and Android, you're going to need to learn Swift or Objective-C for iOS and Java, or use RAD Studio or Kotlin for Android, which is two different completely languages. And that's not only the problem, it's like this is going to cost you a lot of money having native applications, because you're going to have two different projects completely independent in two different languages that you need to maintain in the future as well. So using FireMonkey, it really lowers the cost of ownership and your technical debt. And user experience and scalability. With FireMonkey, you're going to start very small, and you're going to have a native user experience, as we will see in a second, and you're going to scale from there very, very easily and implement new features, as we've seen earlier with the biometric authentication. You just drop the component and off you go. You have it ready for iOS and for Android. So choosing your tooling. We have on the left the native tools, which the pros are, we have native performance, we have native user experience, and it's fully secure. We have the cons, which is you're going to need multiple teams, because obviously you're going to have multiple languages to deal with, so you're going to need different developers, or very good ones that they know multiple languages at the same time, which going to lead you to higher dev cost and multiple code base, which in my opinion is one of the worst things you can have, multiple code bases, because if you find a bug, then you're going to need to fix it in both code bases. If you want to implement a new feature, you need to coordinate two different teams to develop the same feature and to make it look the same, so it's cohesive. And on the other side, we have the web-based tools, which is true. You just need one team. It's going to lead to a much lower dev cost, because you're going to have just one code base, and you're going to be able to be in the market much faster. But on the cons, you have not native user experience, because it's not a native application. As I mentioned, it's a script and it's slightly more unsecure, because you're providing some of the code within your application. And after all, it's a scripted performance. It's not native, so you need JavaScript to execute all this code. And this is where FireMonkey lands, which is right in the middle. You have the multi-device native UI experience provided by Embarcadero. You have the native performance, the native user experience is fully secure because it's compiled, and you need just one team, and you're going to be in the market very, very fast. Okay, I'm not going to go every single one of these. I just want to quickly explain what's going on under the FireMonkey layout and how it works. Sticking with the same example we were talking about earlier with the biometric authenticator. you're going to be in this layer most of the time, which is you're going to code in Pascal or C++. And then you have the FileMonkey layer that is in charge of knowing to which platform you're developing for, sorry. Could be Android, could be iOS, could be macOS, could be Linux. But then underneath, we have all those interfaces that they could point to different APIs. So the compiler will do the hard work for you, and then it will point to the specific platform APIs. You don't need to know if, for example, a camera, you just want to use the camera. So you drop the camera component and you say, take a picture. Then the compiler will compile it specifically for each platform and will use the platform API. And you're going to have the same events, the same methods. Doesn't matter in which platform you are developing for. So yeah, this is. We'll see a few examples later. This is just great. Talking about mobile and data, it's quite a hot topic as well. We encourage you to use obviously Interface to Go, and it's included with Enterprise. You can deploy it as much as you want if you have Enterprise. No limitation whatsoever. And what are the important topics? Well, it's always available because it's a database engine running in the device itself with its own database. I don't know if you have used SQLite or something like that in the past. It's pretty much the same thing. You can use FireDAC in your mobile application, accessing the database that has been stored locally in your phone. And the good thing compared with SQLite is that you can encrypt data, which is quite difficult with SQLite. Why is this important? Because if you want to be GDPR compliant, you're going to need to encrypt most of the sensible data within the device itself. For example, sticking to the health example we were talking about earlier, the doctor is going to have a lot of information very sensitive in the mobile application. So all that information needs to be encrypted, because what happens if the doctor loses the phone and someone manages to extract the database? We will have all this critical information exposed, so it needs to be encrypted in the device itself. And Interface to Go offers you that out of the box. You can even have multiple encryption keys. I'm not going to go into too many details, but it could also be user role based, so some users can see some things, some others can see some others. And it's one of the very few database available out there that is completely compatible with every single platform. So you can use the same Interface to Go to deploy for Windows, Linux, macOS, iOS, and Android. And not only that, but the database itself, which is just one file, is compatible between all the platforms. So if you have, let's say, an iOS device and you want to debug that database and you extract it from the iOS device and you drop it in your Windows machine and connect it, you're going to have access to the data as it was a Windows database. You don't need to export it, re-import it, or do anything else. So that's just brilliant for debugging. And also, yeah.
What about in-memory tables?
You can use memory tables as well, not a problem at all. But once you close the application,
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, the application.
Also mobile devices.
Yeah, mobile.
Platform.
Yeah, 100%. The whole FireDAC stack is compatible for all the platforms.
Yeah, I heard you say that. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, no, it's true. I'm going to show you in a minute.
Okay, perfect.
Oops. And also there is a very cool feature. It's quite geeky and a bit advanced, but in case you're interested, Interbase has a feature called Change Views. Well, what it does, imagine that you have an application. We need to understand as well that a phone won't always have internet. Sometimes the signal will drop. And if we want to make the application still responsive, we need to store some of that data and cache it in case the user changes something. And once we have internet, we need to push that to the server. So Interbase has this feature called Change Views that you can mark when information has been synced with the server, and then you will have a list of all the modifications that have been done in the database, and then synchronize that to the server. It's pretty much that example I did earlier with a RAD server and that UI that we could see how many changes there have been going on in the VCL application. We can use that as well on mobile, which is very handy. Obviously, there is some work behind the scenes because what happens if two users modify the same record at the same time from two offline devices and sync it at the same time? There is some work you need to analyze in the, we cannot do magic. So you're gonna need to analyze that data that is coming through the back end and decide which one is the valid one. But having that information of which data has been modified since the last time we were online is very valuable when you're developing for mobile applications. Okay, enough talking. Let's see a demo. Let me have another sip. Okay, let's create a new multi-device application. And now we have here some different templates that you could use out of the box. Let's start with a blank one, so we can create the UI exactly as we want. And if you're familiar with VCL, FireMonkey is going to resonate very, very familiar as well. It's just a few concepts change, but the essence is pretty much the same thing. So here we can see what it will be a form. And we have all the tool palette right here with all the components that we can use. In this case, let's go very Windows and make a page control, which is called tab control, I think. Yeah. So we have a tab control here. Let's make this slightly smaller. And as you can see, the tab control, I right click on it and I say add tab item. Okay. We have two tabs. Everything looks very Windows to me so far. Let's align this to the whole client. So it uses all the space. Doesn't matter the size of the screen. And let's drop in here and edit. And a button. As you can see, it's the button as well. So it's same name convention as we had in VCL. Let's rearrange this a bit. Let's put a button here. And let's also add, let's say, a checkbox. Okay, let's compile this to Windows and see. Also, let's code something, yeah? Let's put here inside the button, double click. We have our very trusty on-click event. And let's put a show message. Let's be very original, shall we?
Let's be like home.
So let's compile this. We're on Windows 32 at the moment. And let's see what we get. Okay. Very boring, standard application. We have the edit that we can type. We have the checkbox. And we have the button that we get the hello world message. Cool. Okay. If we come back here, we can see that this is something we don't see on VCL. So this is very cool because you can see beforehand how the application is going to look in Android, iOS, and macOS. So let's say I want to see how this will look on Android. And we can see that the UI changes a bit. The tabs now use all the space. This looks very Android. We have the input now that is Android styled. Same thing with the button and the checkbox. So this lets me readapt this a bit to make it look a bit more appealing. And now if we come back to Windows, still looking fine to me. If we go to macOS, we can see now that the tabs are blue, following the macOS standards. The buttons are rounded. And the coolest bit, if we go to iOS, the tabs go to the bottom. And I didn't need to do absolutely anything because this is the convention in iOS. The tabs go to the bottom. And we can even add icons if we want to. So we can come here to styles. And we have, probably you're going to see it, but we have plenty of icons already that we can assign automatically, and those will be shown only on the applications where the icons are allowed. So on Android, we don't have the icon, but if we come to iOS, we have the icon down there. Obviously, you can load whichever icon you want using an image list. Okay, but this is all cool and all, but I want to see this being executed in an actual macOS machine or an iOS device. So how do we do that? Let me minimize this. There's an application for the whole FireMonkey development that is called PA Server. PA Server, what it does is it creates a little client. This is available for macOS and for Linux as well. And what it does, it creates a client that is listening in port 64211. Once you have that set up as a platform on Delphi, it will connect automatically to that client. And here I have it already pre-configured, but it's as simple as come in here, edit the connection, and specify the IP. Because, for example, in this case, I have a MacBook with a virtual machine running Windows, but you could easily have a Windows machine and then a laptop in the same network and use the same feature connecting through the network. I don't know if that makes sense. So I'm connected to the IP, which is the IP of my macOS, let's say it's here, macOS computer. Okay, it works. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say, okay, I want to compile for macOS ARM because it's the technology used in this computer. I click execute. Now we can see the platform and the build configuration. It's going to take a few seconds and it will pop up automatically here the application I just created, but now it's for macOS. If I click this, hello world. This is all run on macOS. Same thing with the checkbox. But yeah, we want to execute this in iOS. So we simply go iOS simulator, compile. Okay, I forgot to do something. I had to run iOS simulator and then I have to wait a few seconds because now we're going to see here a list of all the simulators I have in my machine. So I have iPad, iPhone 14 Pro, iPad mini, blah, 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 blah. All the devices that Apple lets me try applications through the simulator. The simulator is installed through Xcode, which is the application I have here installed, is the one that Apple uses to create macOS and iOS applications. And what RAD Studio is doing is connecting to the Xcode and pulling all that information so I can access it through RAD Studio. So I don't even need to open Xcode at all, but obviously I need it to be installed in my Mac machine. So I'm going to select iPhone 14 Pro. Let's compile. And this should open automatically a simulator of iPhone 14 and run the application for me. And we'll see how it looks. If you have an Android device, it's much easier to develop because you can plug it in straight away through the USB and you can compile it straight to the Android device. You just need to activate the developer mode and off you go. You will see the same drop-down menu I've selected iPhone 14. You will see your device and you can compile the application straight to your phone. And here we have the same application I just did. We have the input box, we have the checkbox, and we have the tabs down here. And if I press a button, we get the show message, hello world. So you can see the potential here. You can see the potential here, how easy it is to develop multi-platform applications. Obviously, this is a very dumb example. But that's the cool thing. I'm going to show you in a few seconds a cooler demo than just this. So if you have Delphi, please play around with FireMonkey because it's just simply great. Okay, now let's see a real demo. No hello worlds or fish. Now more fish facts. So we had an event in London in February. We had like 150 attendees, so it was quite a big event. And we came up with the idea of, instead of showing hello worlds and fish facts, to create an application from scratch using RAD Server, FireMonkey, and VCL, and to show how you can connect all those together, and probably that will make sense for you if you have VCL applications. So what is the demo about? We have a server running Ubuntu 22 and running Interbase, and then we have a bunch of VCL applications. The VCL application, this is probably quite a standard environment that you know, that the VCL application connects straight to the database through the network. And the bit that we're trying to show you is that now we have all these other devices. We have the tablets, we have the phones, we have the laptops. So we need a way to connect those all together, and this is where RAD Server comes in place, as we've seen in the previous demo. Now RAD Server could be installed in the same infrastructure, or you can have it remotely in the cloud if you want to, and then the devices can access remotely through a FireMonkey application. And for the event, we even created a little web app, because with the VCL application, I'll show you in a second, we created the badges that they were, all the attendees used, and they had a QR code. So the FireMonkey application, what it did is the salespeople, because we had plenty of salespeople that came to the event, could scan the QR code with the FireMonkey application, and they got all the details from the attendee. They could add notes of information they need to be sent afterwards. They could mark products they are interested in, RAD Server, Interbase, Yellowfin, whatever. And also the attendees could scan the QR code themselves, and that took them to a website that accessed RAD Server as well, a list of resources, because it was more limited. And they could see their details, and they could send feedback. They could select as well if they were interested in products, but obviously didn't have access to the notes that the salespeople took and all the private stuff we were storing in our database. And from the VCL application, we could create the attendee list, we could create the products, and all that information were afterwards used in the FireMonkey and the web application. And I'm going to show you all this because I have the code here. So let's open the project. Okay. This is the EMS. Every time you find, I think I didn't mention it earlier, every time you find on RAD Studio something that starts with EMS, it's related with RAD Server. It was the previous name. They did a renaming because of marketing reasons, but the internal components are still named as EMS. So if you see something EMS, it means that is a component meant to be used with RAD Server. So in this case, we have just 2 units for the whole backend. We have the data module and we have the web module. I split it in 2 different modules because I wanted that granularity. So the endpoints that the attendees will access through the website, I wanted them to be public, so that everyone could access from our website. But the ones accessing from the FireMonkey application, I wanted they needed to access with a user and password. So each salespeople will have their own user and password, and then you need to be authorized to access all the information here in the data module. I'm not going to go through the whole project because, as you can imagine, it's fairly big, but it's really not that big. So what we have here, this is pretty similar to what we've seen during the demo. We have a lot of queries for FireDAC queries, and we have the same EMS dataset resource. So I'm publishing a lot of tables using these components, and this is just pretty much repeated for a bunch of different tables. I have some extra things here, but they're really not that relevant. It's just 2 specific cases. And the web module is pretty much the same thing. It's a bunch of dataset resources and fire DAG queries. So let's execute this. Obviously, as you can see, I have a bunch of endpoints here for nodes, attendees, events, products, etc. And I can access through here to localhost attendees. So these are the attendees. Then I can come to a specific attendee. It is exactly what I showed you during the previous demo. The code, I just did a few of the nested endpoints as I explained it to you. So I can send this product ID, for example, to a query that has a parameter. And it's pretty much the same thing as I talked about during the previous event, but just in an actual project. One, for example, that I used differently, I created a search. So users could search for a name in the application. So this obviously I had to code it myself, but this just pretty much a very basic using a macro. Then the search comes through a parameter and the URL, and then I use a macro to use like and then search for that in the first name, last name, and company name, and then return whatever I found in the database. So as you can see, it's all the knowledge that you already know about fire DAG and all that, but implemented in this kind of environment. So let's open the VCL application, and probably this will make more sense for you. Yeah, I know. Okay. So here we have a very basic VCL application. We have attendees, we have events, we have products. So this is pretty much the equivalent that it would be for your VCL application. This is connecting straight to the database, and every time I add a new attendee or whatever, it connects straight to the database. Also, important, even if you have a VCL application, doesn't mean that it has to be ugly. You can use styles to make it much nicer. This is an error because it's not connecting to the server. So you can make dark mode as well for your VCL applications. This is literally a line of code. So if you want to sell to your customers saying that you've spent 6 months adapting your application for dark mode, it takes literally one line of code. So doesn't mean that VCL is old and deprecated or anything. So it can still be relevant. So yeah, this is, I can search here. If I search for my name, then I see, I find the user, or attendee in this case. Very basic, a standard configuration. Well, here's where I create all the users that will have access to the application, and this connects to the RAD server instance to create the user in that list we saw before. So I'm using roles as well. Okay, let's open now the one I'm assuming you're more interested, which is the FireMonkey application. Now, no IO simulator. I want to execute it on Windows first. Okay, so this is a FireMonkey application. Here we have a list of events because I coded this application thinking so I can reuse it in the future, so I can use it for multiple events. I actually was thinking about using it here, but it would be a bit of overkill being just 12 people. But if we had an event in Prague as well with 100-something attendees, and we reused it there, and it was quite cool. Everyone loved scanning their QR codes and all that. So yeah, we have a list of events. If I access the event, I see all the attendees that are coming to this event. I can access their details, and all this information is being pulled now from RAD server. All that information I created from the VCL application is being used now in the FireMonkey application. So if I come here to the log of RAD server, I can see that when I move around the UI, we're getting requests and stuff like that. I can mark, for example, that this user or attendee has attended, and that sends a put modification. And now we can see here that the user has attended as well. We can filter that information to see how many has attended. I even added for Prague a check-in headphones and check-out headphones because they needed translation. So we could track how many still requested headphones and didn't return them. And this is the coolest bit. We have this QR code here. That what it does is opens the camera of the device, and then you can scan that QR code that actually forgot to show you. Anyway, I created it with fast reports to create the batches. And if I press the QR code, hello, this is using now my camera. The camera that FireMonkey finds is the front camera I have on my computer. But obviously, if I use this on my phone, I actually have the application still here. If I open it and I turn off airplane mode, bear with me. I have exactly the same camera. But now I'm using the back camera, so I can scan the QR codes, and I can even turn on and off the torch if I want to. So yeah, exactly the same functionality. I have the interest here that I can mark all the products the user is interested in. We can see how these are going through the server automatically as soon as I mark them or unmark them. I have notes that I can take notes for this particular user. So, and also quite cool, we have the burger menu that I can customize with specific actions. And what I want to emphasize that it's only be me, the one that created this whole ecosystem. I created the VCL application, the FireMonkey application, the whole RAD server backend, and it took me around a month to do the whole thing. And I'm not saying that I'm a super good developer or anything. I'm just saying that the tools are that good, and in a few weeks or a couple of months, you can have something already ready for market very, very quickly. It's not the most powerful application in the world, but it's functional, and we're offering something during an event that really engaged with people, and they could see our products being used during an event. So now let's try this on iOS, even though you've seen it on my device, but I want to show you how easy it is as well to test this in the iOS simulator. For this application in particular, I've used some different technologies. I've used Skia for Delphi already, because I can use SVGs, because I'm a big fan of vector images instead of PNGs. I've also used a component that is available on Getit that is called tFrameStand. And on FireMonkey, we have frames, which is something I really encourage you to learn about. They're pretty much, well, there you go. Well, because I have Face ID configured, it's asking, and obviously the simulator doesn't have it, it's asking me for my personal password, and there you go. I have exactly the same functionality now, but on iOS. Also, something I want to point out, because some people have asked me, even though we give this out-of-the-box UI automatic adaptation, some people say, I want my application to look exactly the same. Doesn't matter if I'm on Android or I'm on iOS. For example, if you open Netflix or Spotify, it doesn't matter which platform you are, the application is nearly identical. This is because of UX language and stuff like that, that big corporations want to have the same experience regardless the platform. You can still accomplish that with FireMonkey if you want to. We have style books. There are this component I actually use down here. that you can customize your components for example, this is to create the overlay effect for the adding notes, so you have that grade effect. You can customize absolutely everything, all the components to the very, very detail, in case you're interested in. We provide by default what the platforms suggest, which is tabs on top, tabs at the bottom, etc. But you can customize all that as well if you want to. And yeah, as I was saying, the information is synced because I'm using the same database locally for the Windows application and the iOS simulator. So because I marked this one that checked in headphones, I can see it right here that it requested headphones. Okay, this is the just to quickly explain you what the frame is, because it's something quite important. If we access the code or the list of units I've used for this application, we can see I've used a lot of frames. A frame pretty much is like a component that you can encapsulate code and UI there, and then you can reuse that in multiple places at the same time. For example, these buttons we see here in interests, each of these buttons is just one frame I created. It's called frame button. So if we access to see it, it's just this. And then I created some properties, the public properties and events that I can track from the outside, and then I can reuse this button in everywhere I want. And I have a few events, like the on-click event that I customize myself. So this is a very easy way to create your own components with UI as well and reuse it in the whole application. Not mandatory. If you want to use the standard UI design and create the buttons manually, not a problem at all. But for example, if I want to change the colors now, or if I want to change the design of the button, I know that I just need to come here, edit it, and it's changed everywhere. So yeah, frames are also very, very, very powerful. For example, the dialog comment as well. We have here a dialog that I can reuse in multiple places. In this case, I use it for adding notes, but I created it so I can reuse it in any other place as well. And yeah, this is the demo I wanted to show you. Let's quickly as well talk about something that is a bit more of a pain, but it's not because of us, is how do you upload all this to the actual stores, so to the Play Store and to the iOS store, because creating an application, it's easy, but now we need it published on the stores. So that's not because of Embarcadero RAD Studio, but that takes a bit, because first, for Apple, you need to be certified that you're not going to develop malware and stuff like that, so you need to go through a validation process. With Google, it's slightly easier, but still, you need to provide a lot of documentation to prove that you're a valid company, etc. And once you're approved, then you can create your applications on the store, and then you get a certificate that you need to link to your applications. But we're providing as much information as possible within RAD Studio. If we come here to your project and you come to options, we have the deployment section. If we come, for example, to release Android 64, and we want to build an Android 64 application store ready, we have here an extra bunch of properties and stuff that it will make more sense once you're verified by Google, because they provide with a key store and you need to put a password to it. This is all explained as well in Google's and Apple's developer websites, but you need to know that you can configure all this from RAD Studio itself. And once it's configured, it's done. If you want to upload a new update to the store, you don't need to redo this whole process. It's just for creating a new application. And yeah, I want to emphasize that this is not because of RAD Studio, but because of how the stores work. Same thing for iOS.
Is it possible to deploy it directly to the device?
Yeah. For iOS, once you are certified as a developer, and then you can create your own applications, the Xcode app, it will pull that information from your account.
Okay, so you still need to go through all that
Yeah.
whole process.
Yeah. You will be able to do it easily to use your actual phone, plug in through its USB, and you will be able to compile the application to your phone, but it won't be on the store. You will be using it in the phone itself.
It's in phones in the company.
Yeah, but still, you will have to plug in every phone and do it on each one. Apple with Android is much easier because we can create APK, which is the installer as such. It's like an MSI or an X installer for Windows. And if you activate on Android, let's say, what's the name? Allowing unknown origin installations. I don't remember the specific term, but it's like, I want to allow applications that are not coming from the store. You will be able to install the applications compiled with RAD Studio straight away. Just copy the file, click on the tap on the application, and you will install it. Without going through this whole mess. But yeah, you need to activate that on each device, saying that you allowed, but you have to do it once, and then you can even send that file through a Dropbox link or upload it to your network or whatever, and users can upgrade the application. Apple offers what they call Enterprise Store. That is like a private app store for big corporations, because obviously there's this case of big corporations with hundreds, if not thousands of employees, and the IT department says, we want to deploy an application through our employees, but we don't want to upload that application to the App Store so everyone can download it. And Apple said, okay, we're going to give you this option, but you have to pay for it. And it's not cheap, but you can create your own private Apple's App Store with Apple. I don't remember the price, but it was like something 25 grand or something like that.
Cheaper to just convert to Android.
Yeah. So yeah, for Android it's much easier. And as I mentioned, if you have an Android device and you activate developer mode, you need to check because it depends on each device. Just look for, if you have an Android device, just look for on Google your model and developer mode, and it will explain to you how you can activate it. Usually it's getting in system, about, and then tap in the version a few times, but it depends. Samsung does it in a way, so just check your model. All of them will be able to be activated in developer mode, but just check your model. And then once you select Android 64 here, you will see here on the right in this drop-down menu, your phone. Maybe you need to install specific USB drivers from the manufacturer. It's not that often anymore, but maybe. With Samsung, it used to be a bit of a hiccup. You need to download USB drivers from Samsung website to install them in Windows. Yeah, you need to do a bit of research. Once the phone is on that drop-down menu, you click compile, and it goes straight to your Android phone. Okay, let's close this. And as I was saying, also, as Thomas pointed out, there is a very cool Get It package, because handling the insane amount of icons and splash screens and all that you need to create for applications sometimes could be a bit of a pain. Even though we provide as well a lot of built-in solutions for that. If you come here to icons, we have, if we come to Android, for example, no, not debug, release Android. This is because the requirements of the stores as well. It's not because of RAD Studio. Okay, I think I don't have the images in this computer, but you need to create an image for 36 by 36, another one 48 by 48, another one 72 by 72. It's seriously a pain. Obviously, once you've done it once, you don't have to repeat it again unless you want to change the icon of your application. But there are some specific sizes for Android, some specific sizes for iOS. But you need to know as well that all of those are here in RAD Studio project, and you can configure as well as the splash screens as well. So the splash screen that the user gets when they open the application, you can configure all that. But because we have one for small, another one for landscape, another one for high DPI, another one for tablets, another. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to. But using
A lot of different definitions.
yeah, exactly, different DPIs. So once you have all that done, I usually recommend to make a quite big one and using tools like the one Thomas talked about. Just create all of them manually, reassign them to each of the ones asked here on each platform, and off you go. So yeah, I've pretty much talked about all this, how you can create all this for their stores. I'm going backwards for some reason. And there you go. Okay, so Q&A time. I don't know if you have any questions you would like to ask.
What about in the last version of Android? It is not very easy anymore to create a file and let it be on the device.
What do you mean? To create an Android application and leave it on the device, for example?
If you have some kind of data you want to write into the memory in the device.
Oh yeah, but that's because of limitations of the APIs from the Android and iOS. They're making more and more restrictive to access.
It looks like in the beginning that you had implemented, I don't know what I call it.
Yeah, the data access. You
some kind of memory.
Yeah.
Ending. What was that?
You can. Well, to answer your question also, that you can use mem tables. You have them available right here. So you can just drag and drop a mem table and off you go. Use it in your application. And regarding what you're talking about, if we come here to options, project options, there is the provisioning, I think it is. No. Okay, the user permissions, sorry. Here's the insane amount of user permissions that you can request the user when they execute the application. Probably you've seen this when you execute a new application that it starts to ask you questions. It wants to access your location. It wants to access your camera. It wants to access your data storage. It wants to access... All that needs to be configured through this user permissions. Here we have a few that obviously are very important, which is, well, for example, I had to check this one, which is use biometrics, to use the biometric authenticator I used. And then you have obviously access to the internet. And there are a few related with accessing, for example, network state or location, and there is one related with storage. But they're changing it more and more and making more and more sandboxed. So
the problem was while you were developing, you constantly changed a little, and every time you had changed it and you put it to the tablet or phone, then it says, "Oh, this is a new problem, a new project."
yeah, new project, and wipes everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's not very.
Yeah, that's because it creates a new ID for the application, and then the operating system thinks that it's a different application, so it removes all the data that was before. I don't think there is an easy solution for that, and not because of RAD Studio, but because how...
I think, I have not tried it yet, but I think Android had made a new way of assessing those data?
I mean, you could create the data somewhere else, like instead of inside the application itself. But I think that would work
But
only
I want
on
them
in the application.
User setup.
Yeah.
Just that.
I see difficult solution for that. The sandbox concept is that all the information it's inside the application folder, and iOS is extremely restrictive. We cannot access outside the application scope whatsoever. So every time you recompile the application, sometimes it generates a new ID. So the information is being wiped because it's a new application. With Android, I think there are a few shared folders that you can share between applications, and maybe it could be a solution for you, but you would need to move those documents to the shared folder.
But that's the problem, because it is not allowed.
It's not. I think in Android 12, I think they're closing down all that and going very Apple.
But I think they somehow made another way around that.
I think is once the operating system doesn't let us get out of the application scope, we cannot do anything else. You will need to root the Android probably to have full access, but that's not obviously recommended. The platforms are getting more and more closed, so you cannot go out of your scope. And if you want to go out of your scope, you need to use the APIs that let you use. Probably you've seen in an application when you tap share, then you have a list of all the applications that you could use the information. That's not because I'm accessing the application, but that's through an API communication that those other applications have configured, saying, hey, I want to be allowed to receive information from other applications. But you need to specify the format that it's going to be, so it's not just accessing the app and dropping a PNG in there.